Hi, welcome to Navel Gazing on valleyindy.org and 103.5 WNHH, New Haven's community radio station. Today's episode is brought to you by Valley Gives Back, a new initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Adding a charity to your estate plan creates a legacy that tells future generations what causes matter to you during your life. Your action inspires others to follow your lead and to make a difference. With a planned gift, you have the power to impact your community forever without affecting your current lifestyle. For more information, visit valleygivesback.org. The Valley Gives Back is an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation, connecting private philanthropy to the long-term public good of the Valley. Plan now, give later, impact tomorrow. valleygivesback.org.
Hundreds of years we brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs of inbreeding, TV sucking ideas from our head, public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur.
Hey, welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indies Podcast. We're heard on valleyindy.org, we're on libsyn.com, we're on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, and WNHH 103.5 New Haven's community radio station. That is when I remember to send the file over to the radio folks. Sorry. I'm Eugene, and joining me is Ethan Fry.
Hey, how are you?
And we're reporters with the organization, and right now we just concluded recording a podcast with Tom Hennick, the Public Information Officer for the Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission. During this podcast, we give them about, 20 scenarios, each and every one that we've encountered in the lower Naugatuck Valley, and we ask whether or not it jives with open government laws in the state of Connecticut. So the only other thing I'll say, it's Wednesday, December 13th, and I'll probably post this right after you leave here. We're recording this in my kitchen in Derby because I'm home today with my son Jack, who this morning had a 102-degree fever. He's really under the weather, but so far he's been good for the last 45 minutes. So I want to thank you, Ethan, for bringing all this junk, lugging it out to my house so we could do this. Yeah,
I'm amazed I managed to get every wire and stuff we needed.
It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah. But
so
yeah, it was an interesting conversation with Tom, like you said. We love doing this and asking him about all these different scenarios we run into. But something he says during the interview, and just to remind people, public officials or members of the public, they love people to call them or email them or whatever directly to ask these questions anytime you want. That's what they're there for. They're there to help members of the public get information, not just reporters, even though reporters are the ones who ask them about stuff a lot of the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking in 2017, it's very important to let everybody know that the Freedom of Information Act is for everyone, like you said, not just reporters. I know it's fashionable to bash the media and to call them evil, whatever, what have you, but there's something great where there's this act that opens up government to the people. And that's what this conversation's about, that we're about to embark on. And I guess, unless you have anything else to add, here is Tom Hennick of the Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission. Thanks. Joining us on the line is Tom Hennick, the Public Information Officer for the Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good. How are you guys today?
Not bad. So we did this about a year and a half ago. We had an FOI pop quiz during which Ethan and I threw random scenarios that we've encountered here in the Naugatuck Valley and asked Tom to basically be Judge Wapner instantaneously.
All right.
And interpret FOI procedures or rules to us. So we thought we would do that again, but just very quickly before we go into that, I mean, you're sort of like the Batman of the FOI Act in Connecticut, right? Are you more like Batman or like Alfred? How would you describe what you do?
I don't know. That's very Batman, Alfred. Maybe I'm not sure. I'm just here to try to answer questions. That's kind of what we do, and then we do workshops all over the state. Those are my primary functions.
And you do workshops in front of government groups or public bodies or a combination of both private citizens?
Both.
Okay.
For instance, yesterday, not too far from you, I was over in Monroe, and it was staff. They want me to come back in the spring and do one for their board and commission people. I've done them for media groups. It depends on who wants it, who wants to know a little bit more about FOI.
That's awesome. And if somebody, let's say they're very busy and they can't listen to the rest of this awesome podcast, although they should, how would someone get in contact with you to arrange a speaker's engagement?
Sure. Just call the office, 860-566-5682, and ask for me, and I'll pull out my trusty calendar, and we'll set it up.
There you go. All right, so let's get into these scenarios. The FOI pop quiz. If we had more of a budget, we'd have theme music playing right now, but we don't.
All right.
So, all right, first question. Here we go, Mr. Henyk. I'm on a town commission. I file an agenda for a meeting. The last item on the agenda reads executive session personnel. Is this a proper notice of that executive session?
No, 1,000 times no. That's an easy one. Not only has our commission ruled on that, the matter's gone to court a couple times, and things like personnel, litigation, pending matters, things like that people like to throw out there. It's just not enough.
Why is that?
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, there are. It's funny you should ask that question because I answered an email to somebody today. Another journalist who's also struggling with this because he's not getting what so his question was is just personnel too vague, and so I picked up randomly from one of many decisions, and I'll read you this.
Okay.
This is from a commission decision from a couple of years ago. The commission repeatedly has held that in order for the public to be fairly apprised of the reason for an executive session, the public agency must give some indication of the specific topic to be addressed. Descriptions such as personnel matters, legal, or even the appointment, employment, performance, that comes straight out of the statute, are inadequate. I can't say it any more clearly than that hearing officer wrote it.
What if
numerous decisions, again, both the commission and in court.
What if I'm a member of the police commission and the police chief wants to use executive session for, quote, personnel updates, unquote?
Okay, well, it depends on what the update is. If it's about an individual, then it would say update on the performance of, you don't necessarily have to name the individual, but you could say the update of a police officer or a sergeant or a detective or something like that. But if it's an update as to, how many openings there are, how many vacancies there are, that I would argue should be done in public, unless somehow discussing it in public would be a security issue. And then there's also an executive session for that. But it wouldn't be a personnel update. It would be, we're going to talk about, vacancies on the staff, and I don't want to talk about it in public, so it's a security matter. I don't want the general public to know that we're down 6 officers or something like that.
And just continuing along this line a little bit, because these are things we see every day. I'm on a school board. I file an agenda for a meeting. The agenda reads, quote, executive session appointment list, unquote. Is that a proper notice for executive session?
Well, I would argue that you need a little more than that. Appointment of whom? Appointment of teachers, appointment of coaches, appointment of... I just think you need more than that.
Okay. And then, see, we're going through these quickly because we know you're a busy man.
No, that's okay.
Here's the next one. I'm the mayor. I want to talk to my constituents who live in senior housing. I send out an email to the full board of aldermen letting them know about this get-together. I invite the police chief to come. Is there anything questionable about this under the state's FOI Act?
The only thing that would be a problem would be if, with the mayor up there visiting with these folks, he gathered his other people and started doing council business, as it were. And so if they're just there listening or they answer a question or two, you don't want to get crazy about this stuff. It's an informational meeting for the people of the senior housing. I would argue that they could do that. They could sit there and talk. But to notice it and consider it an open meeting that, invite the world to, I would argue that probably wouldn't be necessary, as long as, again, the board members themselves don't start doing board business sort of off in the corner.
So even the fact that the mayor sends out an email to all the members of the Board of Aldermen inviting them, that's not the same as organizing a meeting through email?
I would argue that's correct.
All right. Ethan, do you want to go on to the next one? You're silent. I thought you dropped your computer at the beginning.
I remembered a new scenario I wanted to ask about, so I was just typing that in. I don't want clickety-clack noise going on in the background.
We're up to pending litigation then.
Yeah, quote-unquote pending litigation. We see this a lot. Is there anything in the FOI Act that prohibits elected officials from commenting on lawsuits?
From commenting on it, not in the FOI Act. Now, obviously, they've got attorneys in their ears, and they've got, there's legal reasons not to comment on it, but there's nothing in FOI that would stop them from doing that. They could withhold certain documents created to be part of the strategy with that pending litigation, but again, whether they comment or not is entirely up to them.
And that question came from me because I've encountered situations where a public official will say, I can't comment, it's pending litigation, or they'll be advised to not comment, as if that's a law, but it's just their personal...
No, it's not the law. I mean, let's be honest, it probably makes sense.
It's smart. Yeah.
I mean, if you're involved in a lawsuit to be sort of spouting off about what you think. However, on the other hand, if let's suppose a town is sued after making a decision, I wouldn't see any harm in saying something like we're going to vigorously defend our decision. We made our decision based on X, Y, and Z, and here's why we're going to defend it. I don't see where that would be a problem. But if you start dipping into the strategy as to how you're going to defend yourself and what witnesses you're going to call and stuff like that would probably not be a good idea.
Okay.
Now, remember, I should remind everybody I'm not an attorney, but that's what I know to be the case.
Yeah, that one. You don't. That one's outside the FOI Act.
You don't give away your
Act,
strategy.
Yeah,
you don't give away your strategy.
But there's no automatic by statute gag order on these things, which sometimes we think.
There is not.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Heath.
I'm a member of the public. I attend a public hearing on a housing proposal and read from a statement I have prepared. When the meeting minutes are published, they do not include my statement, just that I spoke in opposition to the proposal. Is that okay?
Okay. That is certainly within the bounds of FOI. That's not a problem. If you turn the statement in, it becomes a public record, but there's no requirement that it be attached to the minutes or printed verbatim in the minutes. So how much they put in there is entirely up to the board.
And that's an interesting one. Is that we hear that complaint a lot as reporters from members of the public saying, I look at the meetings and their meeting minutes and they're useless. They didn't include everything that I said. Do you get complaints of that nature a lot from the general public when they attend a meeting and then review it?
From time to time we do, and not to to be unfair to the public, but the law on minutes is actually pretty specific, and it's very Spartan, for lack of a better word. It really only requires a record of the votes. So technically, if all it had was who voted for what or for whom, they would be in the realm of compliance with FOI. So how much more they put in there is really up to the board or the commission or the person doing the minutes. However, whoever sort of has that power, I guess.
Okay. And then moving on, this one I think I generated too from things that I'm starting to experience as things become digital. Let's say I'm a member of the public. I used to be able to walk into City Hall and ask to see applications pending in front of the local Planning and Zoning Commission for development. And they would just hand me a file. They would hand me, literally a file with everything connected. Every paper connected to that application would be in a nice manila folder or a file folder. Now, since everything's going digital, it's hard to get that exact, all those documents. You kind of have to go through a computer. How can I see everything connected to a proposal if it's only on one computer in the P&Z office?
Well, I mean, there's a piece of the FOI Act, a provision that says, how you store things, how you make sure things are available. That also must take into account the fact that they need to be available to the public. So if they've got everything digitally and then everything is sort of filed that way, then there'd have to be a way to let the public see it, even though it might be easier to just hand you a file. It's not easier for their filing purposes. So I guess what I would say is that they'd either have to give you a disk to look at, to put everything on there, or have a terminal there for you to look, or be willing to print it out and have you look at it and say, here's everything we have, and let you look at it. It's, the idea would be that you have a right to see these records, and just because they choose to store them in a different manner doesn't absolve them of their right to to make them available, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Interesting. Yeah, I never thought that. Yeah, just get it all on a disk or get on a thumb drive of some kind is a way to deal with that.
Or they could just proactively put them on the city website. That would also be a great
if
thing.
They wanted to. Yeah. Sure. I'm going to try to. If you hold on just 1 second, I was looking at the.
Yeah, sure.
On or after July. This is section 1-211, subsection C. On and after July 1st, 1992.
Whoa.
Before any public agency acquires any computer system, equipment, or software to store or retrieve non-exempt public records, it shall consider whether such proposed system, equipment, or software adequately provides for the rights of the public under the Freedom of Information Act, at the least cost possible to the agency and to persons entitled to access to non-exempt public records under the Freedom of Information Act. So it's telling you that you can store them, and this was as this sort of started with electronic record keeping back in 1992. It's telling you that you still have to make sure that the public's rights are protected.
That's great.
I'm amazed that was a concern 25 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Eugene, most likely interrupting myself to bring you a message from our sponsor. What will you be remembered for? Adding a charity to your estate plan creates a legacy that tells future generations what causes mattered to you during your life. Learn more at valleygivesback.org. It's an initiative of the Valley Community Foundation. Plan now, give later, and impact tomorrow at valleygivesback.org. Now back to the show. Let's move on. I'm a member of the public. I've submitted an FOI request asking for documents from City Hall. How long does the government have to respond to my request?
Okay, that's the word respond sort of loads this question. The law says that there must be a response within 4 business days, but the response has been interpreted to mean respond. We've got your request. We're looking into it. The access is required promptly, and that is sort of open-ended. And when that went to court very early in the life of the law, the court said promptly means, don't laugh, without undue delay, which basically leaves it wide open. So, on the one hand, I would rather have a deadline. You got a week, you got 2 days, whatever that is. But on the other hand, an agency can look at the request and say, oh, look, this is just one piece of paper. Wait 30 seconds, I'll get it to you. Or it can say there are boxes and boxes here that we have to review, that we have to let our lawyer look at, that we have to redact. It could take months, and months could be reasonable. It could be considered reasonable. And so that's the promptness, it really is in the eyes of the beholder. We've got a situation going on now with a couple of state agencies and a couple here up in the capital city in Hartford, where due to budget situations and staffing problems, it's taking them months to produce reports that used to take a couple of days to report. And so people are filing complaints, and then our hearing officers and our commission have to grapple with the fact that they have these shortages, and are they still being prompt when it's taking 22 months to produce a report? And it's it's interpretive, so it's very difficult. I think at some point, as the length of time it's taking to get reports from some of these agencies continues to grow, I think that we might start saying, look, we get your problem, but you've got to fix it. You've got to put another 2 or 3 people on this or something like that. I don't know where that's going to go, but at some point it would cease to be prompt, budget problems or not.
I guess the other solution is for the lawmakers to revisit the law and maybe put a end date on there.
Define promptly themselves, and not.
They could. Yeah. That's also possible. Yeah.
All right, Ethan's going to ask you the next few.
I'm a member of the public. A disciplinary report has been prepared against a city employee. Can I see that report?
Disciplinary reports are by and large absolutely public, and there's a piece of the statute that's 10-151C that talks about you can't get a teacher's evaluation, but a disciplinary report, some people run right to that, and that's just no. That's just if it's a disciplinary report, some malfeasance or something like that, that's automatically public.
And just as like a follow-up to that, sometimes you see like they'll bring in a lawyer to write a report on something like that, and then say, "Oh, it's protected by attorney-client privilege." Would that? Go ahead.
That's a great point. Some have started to do that. If they ask an outside attorney to write a report, and they say, and it's couched in terms of this is my advice to you, and it's not revealed to anybody else, then yes, the attorney-client privilege could hold. But if it's a disciplinary report, if it's this is what this person is been accused of, and this is what we found, and this is what we're going to do, suspended without pay, this, that, or the other thing, then I would argue that part of it has to come out. But the advice perhaps from the attorney, as to what to do, might still be held under attorney-client privilege, except if I'm sure there would then be a follow-up report. You know what I'm saying? A follow-up report is okay, and that I would argue would be public.
Okay. 5 of the 7 members of my local board of aldermen are getting dinner at a restaurant. Is that a violation of the FOI Act?
In and of itself, no. Social and chance gatherings are not meetings and do not need to be noticed. Now, if they're sitting there setting the budget, or they're debating whether or not to overthrow the chairman, then yes, and it's a meeting. So it depends on what they're doing. But if they're just having dinner and being social, and let's not be naive, guys. You know what some of the topics are going to be, but if they're just sort of circling those topics and not, deciding issues, then I would argue it's not a problem. And if it's purely dinner and they're just talking about, how horrible the Giants are, or Ansonia Naugatuck football, or something like that, or the weather, then it's clearly not a problem of in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
I'm on a commission. I file my agenda for an upcoming meeting. Part of it reads executive session if needed. Is that okay? This is like an oldie but goodie in the Valley.
I would argue no. You can't do that. You've got to be more specific, and that goes back to the first question you folks asked. You've got to be more specific. Some people, and it really, I can't get through to some of these folks, they put an executive session on there with nothing under it just in case. You can't do that. You just can't do it. It's got to, if the item itself is on the agenda and it's something that's legitimate for an executive session, the agenda doesn't necessarily have to say executive session. You get to the agenda item and say, you know what? This is really our strategy as it pertains to this lawsuit. We should take this into executive session. That would be okay. But just to have executive session floating out there just in case is not a good idea.
Okay.
I'm on a commission. We hold an executive session to talk about an individual employee. On the agenda, we don't name the person, just the person's title. Is that okay?
Yes, it would be okay. There are cases that say just personnel is not enough. There are also a couple of cases that say it's not required to name the individual.
Okay. And let's pretend at that same executive session, the commission invites its lawyer to meet with them. During the executive session, a consultant they've hired twice pops into the executive session to offer some pertinent information. Is that okay?
If the board needs that consultant in the room to have that conversation, to use that person's expertise, to help them with their deliberations, the answer is yes. It's okay.
Does the person have to be formally named as being a part of the executive session and invited in a formal manner?
I don't know about a formal invitation, but I would argue that some sort of a acknowledgement in public would be a good idea. It certainly should be in the minutes as to who's in the executive session.
Okay. Ethan, why don't you skip the next one because we're starting to run into our time one. Some of these I was just writing to write.
Yeah, could I go to one of the ones?
They're good questions. They're all good. And they're very basic things that some boards don't get, so you're wise to ask them.
I appreciate that.
Let me ask one that just came up last week.
Yeah, and go to all yours, because a lot of them were mine. So
I'm an elected official. The board I sit on schedules a special meeting and files an agenda more than 24 hours ahead of time. Also, the chairman of the board calls all the members of the board reminding them of the meeting, except for me. Is that okay?
Well, I would argue that it's not good policy, that it's not a smart thing to do, that it's not fair, all of those things. But there's nothing in that violates the FOI Act. Calling someone to remind them of a meeting would not be a problem. Skipping somebody, legally, technically, not a problem. I would just argue that it's a bad way to conduct business.
Okay. Next one, I'm a member of the public. While paying taxes in City Hall, I notice some public officials meeting in a room with the door open, so I walk in and sit down and learn the meeting is of a quote-unquote task force formed to discuss blight issues. Afterward, I asked the city lawyer who's in the meeting if the people meeting are a public agency, and he says yes. An agenda for the meeting was filed in the clerk's office, but less than 24 hours before the meeting happened.
Ouch.
Is that okay?
Okay. No, technically it's not. I mean, I thought where you were going to go with that was it's a task force, so we don't have to worry about FOI. I hear that a lot.
Well, that's sort of I mean, this was rooted in an issue that came up in a city we cover, and
right. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it a task force. You can call it a working group. You can call it a workshop. But if it's a board that's gathered to do an assigned task, it's a meeting. So the fact that they acknowledge that and recognize that, that's good. The fact that they had an agenda, that's good. The fact that it was in less than 24 hours in advance, that doesn't work. It really needs to be available 24 hours in advance.
Okay. I'm a member of the public. I attend a meeting of a public agency whose agenda includes an executive session to discuss a possible real estate purchase. The board votes in public to go into executive session, and I leave the room and wait outside. Later, the door opens and the board members walk out saying the meeting has been adjourned. Is that okay?
No, they need to adjourn it in public. And I hope they didn't vote on the land transaction in an executive session, because that would be a very bad violation. All the votes need to be public. All the votes need to be recorded publicly.
Okay. And then I'm a public official. A reporter has requested a public document from me, but I have yet to share it with my fellow elected officials. I want to hold the document until my colleagues read it. Is that okay?
I would argue that technically it's not. I understand the thought behind it. It makes sense. But I would say that once you have it, it's a public record, and there's no exemption on it. You would really have to give it out. I might try to work something out with the reporter and say, look, give my colleagues 24 hours to read it. I'll be happy to give it to you. Or I'll give it to you now, but please don't use it for 24 hours so that they can at least have a chance to read it. You know what I mean? I would hope something could be worked out there. But technically, once the public official has it, it's a public record.
Okay,
right.
yeah, and that's like another oldie but goodie. But I've seen less of that recently. I guess I don't know.
I had it happen to me the other day. All right, those are all our questions, Mr. Tom Hennick. I want to thank you so much for coming on our podcast. This is the favorite. We've done this twice with you now, and it's definitely, at least for Ethan and I, it's our favorite thing to do.
Oh, great! I appreciate that. That's very kind. So
yeah,
happy
no
to do it anytime.
All right, sir. Thanks a lot.
Tell your towns to call us anytime they have questions. We'll be happy to try to help.
Heck yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Tom Hennick, Public
like
Information Officer for the Connecticut Freedom of Information Commission.
It's like the public transparency version of Stump the Joke Man.
I hope one person will get that. One person out there. All right, so until next week, I'm Eugene Driscoll, and that was Ethan Fry. See you.
For hundreds of years we've brought you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation, critical reading, dumbed down nation, signs of inbreeding, TV sucking ideas from our head, public discourse just about dead. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur. Our readers are in the opens each day, yeah. Online clickbait, a prurient way, yeah. It's free information here to stay. Not even hookers give it away. Advertising, metastasizing, newsroom shrinking, constant attrition. We'll ride the dinosaur. We'll ride the dinosaur. Dinosaur. Deadlines, bylines, pictures too. An editorial comment for a buck or two. Fire down the block, the murder next door. And now we wonder what it's all for. Social media coming free to you, funny pages, the mayor's wages, criminal scenes, corruption schemes, ink state wretches asking tough questions. We'll ride the dinosaur, yeah, ride the dinosaur. The presses are running all through the night. We're printing the truth with all of our might. We're platform agnostics, got that interweb too. Buy an ad, see what we can do. We still have subscribers, still have our fans. We're here every day, so give us a chance or we'll make an art stand. Just hold us in your hand, yeah, and we'll ride the dinosaur. Yeah, ride the dinosaur.